Hi guys, welcome to another episode of U.S. History with Lennox, and today we're moving out of the 19th century and into the 20th century. We're leaving the Gilded Age behind, a time period when America was defined by greed, corruption, and an entirely new life for most Americans as they had moved to the cities. The Gilded Age marked a turning point for America. We had shifted from an agrarian-based society to more of an urban-based society, but problems came from that shift. Going into the 20th century, William McKinley had just been elected president, and we start to see the beginning of a 30-year Republican control of government. And what we start to see on that political front is the shift from complete support of big business to the necessity of reform. And that's what's going to start happening during what we call the Progressive Era. So as we go forth into this Progressive Era, we're going to look at how the growth and expansion of the Gilded Age is going to lead to reform, not only in society, but in our politics and our economics as well. So here we go. Welcome to the 20th century. To understand the progressive movement, you have to understand how we got to that point. And that was through the Gilded Age. And during the Gilded Age, there was a lot of innovation, a lot of invention, which leads to a rise of industry in our country. That industry is going to offer a lot of opportunity and new jobs for Americans. And a lot of people are going to take advantage of that, moving to the cities, seeking out an opportunity to better their lives. Not only Americans, but people from other countries are going to look to America as the possibility of what could be. And so you're going to see a wave of immigrants coming in, specifically from Southern and Eastern Europe. As all of this is going on, our government has taken a laissez-faire approach to running society, meaning they're hands off. This is what will allow the growth of corruption within our cities, the growth of monopolies in our economy, and other problems that have to be addressed. Going into the 20th century, the laissez-faire policies of the government are going to start to dissipate. However, though there was a movement for socialist ideas in our country, capitalism was never abandoned. We just thought we could do it better. So instead of letting capitalism run wild like they did under laissez-faire, we're going to try to control it now and improve it. And when you look at the people involved in the progressive movement, it really started with the individual. You would see within cities church leaders coming together and saying, we can make a difference in our society. Politicians are going to start looking at the power that the monopolies and the trust had in America, and they said we really need to start regulating that and pull away some of that power. The labor unions are still here, still fighting for workers' rights. And then groups like women and African Americans and other minorities are going to start demanding better of our society. And so that's what the Progressive Era is all about. Taking the good of the Gilded Age and using that to make society better for everyone. Perhaps the most influential people in the Progressive Era are going to be the Muckrakers. These are writers who use their pen to expose the corruption and scandals that were throughout our society. People like Ida Tarbell, who took on Standard Oil and J.D. Rockefeller. Jacob Riis and his photo journal of life in the tenement slums in New York City in the book How the Other Half Lives. And then Lincoln Steffens, who looks at the corruption of the political machines and the power that they wielded over the city when he wrote The Shame of Our Cities. But perhaps the most well-known muckraker during this time is going to be Upton Sinclair. Upton Sinclair is going to take on the meatpacking industry in America, and he is going to challenge the practices that are occurring in every single meatpacking plant in the country. His book talked about disgusting practices that were occurring, such as rats and their feces dropping into the vat of meat that's being mixed up to be sold, or piles of spoiled meat that were covered in mice and rats that were being mixed in with the good meat just so they could sell it. It was that kind of stuff that Americans started to hear about during the Progressive Era. They said, whoa, we need to fix this. Now, Upton Sinclair's book is actually going to lead to reform with regards to how we package food and drugs, and that'll be taken care of under Teddy Roosevelt's administration. But more on that later. Women played a huge role in the progressive movement. They are erasing the spheres that occurred in our society since the revolutionary time period. If you remember correctly, during the 19th century, we lived under what was known as the cult of domesticity. The idea that a woman's role was in the home and her influence should be felt within the family because strong families would make a strong society. Well, during the Gilded Age, with all the jobs that were opening up in the cities, that was opportunity for young women. And so a lot of young single women were moving to the cities seeking those jobs. And these same women are going to use that new feeling of independence to really push even stronger, finally, for the right for women to vote, a fight that has been going on since the 1820s, 1830s. They're going to form other organizations as well that have an impact on society. For instance, the National Consumers League, created by Florence Kelley, is going to fight for workers' rights, women workers' rights. And in the case of Muller versus Oregon, the Supreme Court is going to rule that states are perfectly within their constitutional rights to create a 10-hour workday. You're also going to see the National Child Labor Committee formed, which is going to fight to end child labor in our country. Other events that women were directly involved in that are going to change our society are going to be the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire in 1911 and the temperance movement, which I'll talk about individually. The Triangle Shirtwaist Fire occurred in 1911 at the Triangle Shirtwaist Company. A fire broke out on one of the upper floors, and the women on the floor above were trapped. They were trapped because, per company policy, there was only one entrance and one exit to that floor. All other entrances had been locked or blocked off. So it was next to impossible to get everyone out. On top of that, we didn't have fire escapes that reached to the higher floors. So women were trapped on that upper floor. Rather than facing the fire, many chose to leap to their death. In the end, nearly 146 workers were killed, predominantly women. Because of that, we're going to see labor reforms come to the surface. You're going to see laws passed that provided workers' compensation and disability insurance. One of the key ideas that labor unions fought for was a minimum wage, and you're going to see that come to fruition as well. On top of that, finally, we are starting to see the 8 and 10-hour workday become the norm, not the exception. The temperance movement is also going to take up during this time the same fight that's been going on since the reform movement in the 1830s, the idea to temper the amount of alcohol in our society. It's going to take on a little bit different role during the progressive era. They're actually going to target saloons and bars in the cities because that's where a lot of the corrupt politicians met and the political machines used as their headquarters. But you're going to have a division within the temperance movement between those fighting for wet cities and those fighting for dry cities. And just to give you an explanation of the two, a wet city, alcohol is still available. However, there's a movement to change people's behavior, change their thought patterns where they can choose not to drink, basically dealing with the individual. Whereas a dry society is you're getting rid of alcohol completely. It's not up to the individual. The government's going to make that decision. You also have this debate between other groups in society. The Protestant native-born Americans typically supported this idea of temperance or prohibition, whereas immigrants, not so much. And remember, think about where those immigrants are coming from. Eastern and Southern Europe, where alcohol part of their daily life. The women's Christian temperance movement is going to get started to fight to change the perception of alcohol in society, that it's not a necessity, that you can choose not to drink. But the Anti-Saloon League is going to push for dry measures, getting rid of all alcohol in society. They will have success in 1919 when the 18th Amendment prohibiting alcohol is going to be passed. That's going to tie in also with the Volstead Act, which will be passed, that prohibited the distribution and sale of alcohol. So from 1919 to about 1933, you're basically going to have an America where the production, distribution, and sale of alcohol is illegal. Now, this is going to give rise to organized crime in our country because as many laws as there are that are going to be passed, there's just as many people trying to find a way around those laws. So you're going to see people like Al Capone and Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky become the alcohol suppliers of the 1920s. Reform is also going to take place within our cities. Jacob Riis pointed out what life was like in the slums. And we already know through other muckrakers, such as cartoonist Thomas Nast, the power that political machines wielded over city governments. Now, you'll see some progressives deal directly with the problem, such as Jane Addams and the settlement houses, creating a place where women and immigrants could go to receive job training or receive childcare, whatever they needed to get on their feet. But you also saw the people starting to rise up against these political machines, trying to take the power away from them, especially in the area of public utilities such as gas, water, and transportation. The fight for political reform started in the cities at what we call the municipality level, where in the past it was the political machines who determined who would run the major departments of the city. We started to see a shift where the people are given that opportunity to vote in who's going to be the police chief, who's going to be the fire chief. So when you look at it, political reform originated at the local level. And we started to see this as a response to that corruption that existed within those political machines. Now, some cities were set up with your traditional mayor and city council working to oversee how the city ran. But others started to introduce a new idea where a city council would choose a manager to oversee all the operations of the city. But the big thing is, more democratic power was being given to the people, where they were electing folks to be the mayor or electing people to be on the city council. In fact, this entire reform movement during the progressive era with regards to politics was all about more democracy. One thing that was introduced was a secret ballot. We had never had a secret ballot before. It's also called the Australian ballot, but now people could vote in private. You don't have to tell everybody who you're voting for. On top of that, political parties started to allow the voters to choose who their candidates would be, rather than the party deciding. So you're taking away a level of corruption that will allow politics to become more democratic. There's these new ideas that are happening at the state level as well. Because we saw corporations kind of exert their power over state governments, we wanted to break that tie between the two of them. The governor of Wisconsin, Robert La Follette, is going to introduce what's going to become known as the Wisconsin idea. This novel idea that government should be controlled by the voters, not businesses, not lobbyists. And so he wants to see more democracy for the American voter. On top of that, with regards to public utilities, he thought the government should regulate those, not the politicians. And so he will actually challenge the railroad industry and push for government oversight with regard to the railroad. He'll pass numerous tax reforms and other political reforms that will be instituted not only in Wisconsin, but other states like California and Nevada. He's also going to introduce a workers' compensation program in Wisconsin, in which workers in Wisconsin, if they're injured on the job, they could still receive lost wages. Huge movement. Teddy Roosevelt actually referred to Wisconsin as the laboratory for democracy. Finally, within the states, you start to see more reform that got more people involved in the process. The state governments, like I said, are going to become more democratic, specifically with the use of initiatives, referendums, and reforms. Now, initiatives allowed citizens to create laws. So if you have an idea for a law, you can create a petition, and if enough people signed it, that law could be added to the ballot, and the people, not the politicians, would vote on whether or not that would be a law for your community. The referendum is going to allow voters to vote on an issue, like tax increases. These would be introduced by legislatures, but the people would vote on whether or not they wanted it. And then finally, recalls. This is actually going to allow voters to take action to remove politicians from office who weren't doing their job. Again, more democracy was a direct effect of political reform during the Progressive Era. In addition, in 1912, the 17th Amendment is going to be passed. This is going to allow for the direct election of senators in the United States. Up until this point, Americans would select state legislatures who would choose who would represent the state in the Senate. Well, with the 17th Amendment, now the people are deciding who their senators will be. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, Americans were more involved in the process of choosing candidates. And in 1916, most states are going to have what's known as direct primaries, in which members of each political party, the people, would vote on who their candidates would be, not the parties. All of this, guys, should lead you to understand that the political reform in the progressive era directly resulted in more democracy or more involvement of the people. So that's a quick introduction to the progressive era, more so on the city and state level. In our next video, we're going to look at how these progressive ideals are going to grow to a national level. So join us on the next one. If you missed anything on this one, watch it again. I appreciate it. Feel free to subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.